What's going on, you guys? This is RBG, aka the Random Black Gamer, bringing you an update on the crossover film between Transformers and G.I. Joe, which, might I add, feels like a project that's been forgotten about for whatever reason. Which is crazy, right? Because it feels like it was just yesterday that we got that awesome tip-off at the end of 2023's Transformers Rise of the Beast, where we would see the primary human protagonist Noah Diaz receive an invitation to join this secret military organization known as G.I. Joe. But it's been about 3 years since we got that post-credit stinger, and there's yet to be any news in regards to this new crossover. And you guys have probably heard me say this multiple times in previous videos, but one of the biggest reasons why it's so difficult to ascertain the status of this upcoming project is the fact of the uncertainty between Paramount and Hasbro and what they're gonna do with the Transformers, because they haven't been able to regain that traction like they had in the earlier years of the Transformers movies. All of their attempts to reach those billion-dollar box office numbers have failed, and had Transformers ROTB pulled in those box office numbers, we would have already gotten some promotional materials for this crossover that they're working on. What makes this matter even more confusing is the fact that in June of 2025 it was announced that Michael Bay was returning to the Transformers franchise to direct a new movie, but it wouldn't be for this upcoming Transformers G.I. Joe crossover, which is crazy because we already know that Bay has an obsession with the military and he'll insert them in any kind of movie, including the TF films. So if there was ever a time to feature the humans on the screen more than the Transformers, it would absolutely be this one, because the G.I. Joes, they are stars in their own right, and once upon a time they were Hasbro's big flagship property. But unfortunately, time hasn't been too kind to that particular property. Despite Paramount's various attempts to introduce G.I. Joe to a modern audience, they haven't been able to quite garner the reception that the Transformers films have. Even though the movies had a star-studded roster of big names like The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, Bruce Willis, and Channing Tatum, they've only been able to amass $678 million at the box office, which is $31 million less than the first live-action Transformers movie, which amassed over $700 million alone. And don't even get me started on the Snake Eyes solo film that fell off the cliff with $40 million at the global box office, which makes me wonder why they would even want to make a crossover film between G.I. Joe and the Transformers, because both properties aren't doing that well nowadays. Fans aren't willing to spend any more hard-earned money just to get a mediocre Transformers film, and nobody asked for a live-action G.I. Joe movie, and this just feels like a last-ditch effort to throw something at the wall and hope that it sticks. Originally, the film was rumored to release in 2025 or 2026 at the latest, but now we're in the year 2026, so we know that it's not going to drop anytime this year. And it's being reported that Paramount must start production on a Transformers film by 2029, or they could lose the rights to the franchise. So I'm thinking that they could possibly start production on this movie by next year, but many have been wondering how they're going to integrate the G.I. Joes into this pre-established universe, because right now we know that we're in the Nightverse, but like I said, things haven't necessarily panned out in regards to box office performance. And given the fact that we also have a separate movie being made by Michael Bay, chances are Paramount wants to see what that movie's gonna do. They want to see if fans are gonna be receptive to it, and it'll bring them back those box office numbers. If it does succeed in that area, there's a chance that Paramount will just can the Nightverse and bring back the old Bayverse and integrate the G.I. Joes there. Because as I previously mentioned, Michael Bay does well with military aspects of his movies. Even though the movies have become notorious for their overly complex designs, there's still an audience that enjoys them, and depending on how they approach this, whether it be a continuation of his Bayverse or an entirely new one that's separate from the previous one, they could essentially use this as a launch pad to implement the G.I. Joes. Because the previous two movies in the Nightverse didn't necessarily reach those big numbers like I said, but if they do implement them in the Nightverse, then chances are the movie will take place in the mid to late 90s, since Transformers Rise of the Beast took place in the early 90s. Now, according to the executive producer of these movies, Lorenzo Di Bonaventura, the process of figuring out how to integrate G.I. Joe and the Transformers has been a little difficult, saying, and I quote, "We really have not discovered the key to that yet, because one of the difficulties with it is there are so many characters that you feel you have to service, and when you do that, you never really deliver any good characters. So the trick here is to figure out how do you combine these two worlds with the least number of people or robots." And even though I'm not the biggest fan of Lorenzo, I kind of understand where he's coming from with this, because this is always going to be a catch-22. How much service can you give the fans? Because we already know that one of the biggest complaints about the live-action Transformers films is the fact that they don't get featured enough in their own movie that bears their namesake. It's always the humans that get all the spotlight, because there's only so much time you can put a computer-generated image on the screen without it inflating the budget. And then there's the whole aspect of the Beast characters making an appearance and not being featured as much in the movie as well, even though it bears their namesake. So yeah, there's always these catch-22s with the live-action Transformers films. It always feels like these characters don't get properly represented. Like, the only ones who actually do get that love is Optimus Prime and Megatron and maybe Bumblebee, because even that character isn't the same one that people grew up with watching in the late 80s. But with all that said, even though they have had these issues translating these characters in live action, I do feel like there is hope for this Transformers/G.I. Joe crossover, because if you guys haven't been paying attention to the comic book sides of things, there's already been some solid groundwork laid out there with the latest iterations of G.I. Joe and Transformers. And that's the newly introduced Energon universe, a new line of comic books that are already getting a lot of buzz and apparently are going to be getting a cartoon adaptation in the near future. And you guys have already heard me say so many wonderful things about this series. There's so much to like about it, and even though it has its few missteps along the way, it's still a solid foundation that makes me look forward to seeing what they do next. It also makes me want to hold off on reading the comic books because I'm very eager to see how they adapt this thing, and I don't necessarily want to be spoiled on anything and have it lose that wow factor once it's translated to 2D animation. Anyways, this universe is being spearheaded by Robert Kirkman, the guy who brought us Invincible and The Walking Dead. And even though his name has been enshrouded in a bit of controversy with the latest issues of Transformers, the universe is still going strong, especially with the G.I. Joe comic books that have been seeing a few crossovers with the Transformers already. So far, we've had the inclusion of Hound, who's been accompanying this G.I. Joe by the name of Clutch. After having a brief hostile encounter with one another, the two realized that they were on the good side and decided to work alongside each other. And for the longest time, Clutch kept his transforming military jeep a secret from the rest of the G.I. Joes, especially from Duke, who already had it out for the Transformers since one of them, being Starscream, killed his friend. And one of the interesting things about that little detail is that this didn't necessarily happen in the G.I. Joe comic books. This happened in one of the Transformers issues, the earlier issues that kicked off the Energon universe, where Duke was nothing more than a military pilot. We didn't necessarily see him as a G.I. Joe, and it would be a while until they finally addressed these things in the G.I. Joe comic books, which is what I've been enjoying, man. I love when the comic books let certain story beats breathe and they don't instantly address them. They kind of let you forget until it's time to bring them back up later. So by the time Optimus finally meets up with Duke, there's pretty much some heavy emotional weight there, and once the big red and blue Robo Jesus explains his side to Duke, it pretty much motivates Duke to reshape his perception about the Transformers. Just like the humans, there's more than one faction when it comes to the alien robots who have come to this planet. And it's from there that we see the leaders form a bond, agreeing to share intel and support against the Decepticons and the Cobra, because the Cobra have been reverse engineering a lot of Energon into weaponry, and the only ones that truly understand that are the Cybertronians/Transformers. And moments like this is what Paramount Pictures needs to take notes of when developing this new crossover that they're coming out with. Continue to develop your live action Transformers universe and maybe pepper in a few G.I. Joe characters here and there that you'll see later on in their own solo movie, and then come out with that major crossover. They actually need to give us enough time to grow interested in these characters, because even though they are pre-established and have been around since the 70s and 80s, modern audiences still don't know them. That's why the Marvel Cinematic Universe has been so successful, because they actually reintroduced these characters to a newer audience, and it's only made the longtime fans who have been around since the comic book days love the characters even more. Like I said, it's gonna be a while before we even get a new Transformers movie, but while Paramount Pictures actually develops a script for this, they could be taking notes with the comic books, because these things have been out since 2024 and the issues are coming out stronger, man. So yeah, I also want to remind you guys that they are coming out with a separate G.I. Joe film. It's just gonna be its own thing as opposed to being a crossover. So so be on the lookout for that. But what are you guys' thoughts on this? Do you feel like this project will deliver, and how do you feel about them actually adapting some of the comic book material that we've gotten with the Energon universe? Let me know in the comment section below. As always, I ask that you like or dislike the video. It doesn't have to be a thumbs up, you can give me a thumbs down if you want. But if you really enjoyed this video, it would help me out tremendously if you shared with all your friends and followers on all the different social media outlets. Sharing really makes a difference. But this is your boy RBG signing out on another video. I'll catch you guys later. Peace out.